Cannon Beach.
And as we continue to thank the first responders and doctors and nurses and everybody on the front lines of this public health crisis, today we thank and remember the service members who gave their lives for this country and every one of us living in it.
The price which has been paid for our peace and freedom throughout American history.
Here's the story. Hey, all right. I'm Dan Haggerty. Thanks for being with us. Welcome to The Story. I'm not going to scold you on the meaning of the holiday today. I don't know why do news anchors love to do that. I will tell you a little bit, though, about what I thought about today. All right, so many of you probably know this. I worked in Dallas before I came here. I was working at CBS. I was doing the weekends and filling in on some of the weekday shows, and I just really looked up to the main anchor. His name's Doug Dunbar. He's just cool. He's a really smart guy. He's funny. He's super successful. He's a family man, which is always something that's been extremely important to me. But he's also like a pilot. He plays guitar. He's friends with Joe Montana somehow. Had this like world record for barefoot water skiing at some point in his life. So he's one of those kinds of guys, right? And I used to look at him and think, man, this dude has everything in the world. And then I learned that he grew up without his dad. That's because Doug's dad was killed in Vietnam when he was just a boy. He posted this picture on Instagram today. I don't know, he's maybe 4 or 5 years old there, standing next to his dad's gravestone, all the flowers around him. He started this post by writing, "Dear Dad, I wanted you to know how much I miss you." So that's what I was thinking about today. The world has witnessed a lot about bravery the last few months, and the men and women who gave their lives for this country exemplified that bravery to the highest extent. We'd love to shine a little spotlight on the people who you are thinking about and who you are honoring this Memorial Day. So tell us about them, all right? Email us at thestory@kgw.com. You can also find me on Facebook, as always. You can Instagram me, or you can use Twitter and that hashtag, HeyDan. Now, I do hope if you're one of the people out there lucky enough to still be working, you're also one of those lucky people who maybe got the day off today. And if you are fortunate enough to have the day off, I hope you're spending your free time a little bit more responsibly than the people in this video. Now, I'm sure that some of you online types have seen this already by now. This is cell phone video of a bar at the Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri. It's viral at this point. The bar advertised this party saying that they would limit capacity and encourage social distancing. How do you think they did? All right, so we saw stuff like this in Florida, and New Jersey, and Arizona. A lot of places that have begun to relax their stay-at-home guidelines. Doctors, meanwhile, shouting from the rooftops while people are packing rooftop bars that this kind of behavior will almost certainly lead to spikes in COVID-19 cases. Now, here in Oregon, we weren't perfect either, and the problem was highlighted in a very Oregon-y type of way. The Oregonian did a piece on some climbers who crowded Mount Hood this weekend. Now, on top of a lot of problems with social distancing there were terrible conditions. The rescue crews there had to go out and save 2 people in one day. Now, they're asking people to avoid climbing altogether in that area. And listen, that's not to say that most people, overwhelmingly, didn't do just a great job of getting out while staying safe, right? Most people did that. Actually, most people were staying at home. But the people who did go out, most of you did it responsibly and respectfully. But now the restrictions across Oregon are starting to loosen up. The question is, can we rely on people to keep that up? Maggie Vespa learned that nobody wants to know that answer more than the people at one of Oregon's biggest attractions, the coast.
Cannon Beach is a sacred place.
Deb Attia posted this letter on Facebook.
A rare place of serene beauty.
And I asked her to read it out loud.
Low tides expose starfish and other sea creatures that fill you with a sense of wonder.
Even she was surprised at what happened toward the end.
As you return, please love and protect our Cannon Beach. I just love this place. So I'm sorry. I don't mean to cry.
Attia wrote this letter not because of the holiday weekend, but because of what's coming next.
How many, just by show of hands, are nervous about sort of restrictions loosening tomorrow with short-term rentals and whatnot?
I am.
All of you.
Tomorrow, like cities up and down Oregon's coast, Cannon Beach will lift restrictions on short-term rentals. Translation, hotels can open up. Airbnbs can open up. It's worth noting all these cities exist in counties that have entered Phase 1 of Oregon's reopening plan. And under Phase 1, Governor Kate Brown is still urging people not to travel, especially from Multnomah County, which has yet to reopen at all. But everyone on this Zoom call lives full-time in Cannon Beach, and they know their hometown is a great escape.
To suddenly be locked down was traumatic on many levels.
So we heard from a small business owner who doesn't want to backslide.
And that we need to Follow protocol, even if you're not so worried about it for yourself. Realize that this is about so much more than yourself.
We heard from a retired veterinarian who doesn't want local hospitals overwhelmed.
You know, we want to protect the visitors. We hope they want to protect us.
And we heard from David Fry, an Oregon native and perhaps familiar voice as co-host of NBC's National Dog Show alongside John O'Hurley. Fry didn't mince words.
Wear a mask. If the business asks you to wear a mask and you think you're too macho to wear a mask, well, I got news for you. You're not macho, because that means you don't care about people.
Perhaps to prove that point, the group even sent us this photo of a whale statue wearing a mask. That said, everyone here agrees, despite their nerves, businesses need to reopen.
It's going to be kind of a slow build-up.
It's a fine line that Denny Grossloud is walking too. His employees at Surf Sand Resort and Stephanie Inn have been cleaning and prepping to open up again. He knows guests want to come and his staff want to host them safely.
And I love the fact that, even over this Memorial Day weekend, it wasn't super busy. And that really, I think, speaks a lot for our day trippers, really, staying positive and doing what they need to do.
Okay, Maggie Vespa joining us now. Maggie, you touched on it in the piece, but even though most of the state is in phase 1 right now, the governor still asking people not to travel anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of like an awkward in-between, because phase 1 was basically designed to let people who live in those counties get out and patronize their local businesses. But traveling between counties, we're told by experts, can complicate the potential of the spread of the virus and therefore complicate contact tracing and basically just increase the likelihood of all of us backsliding into having to close completely again. That said, the governor's staff did note that she never closed, the state never closed hotels and short-term rentals. They left that up to local jurisdictions who are now opening them. So it is kind of a gray area in all of this. It's really interesting.
Yeah, you can pick up some mixed messages there. Of course, some of these businesses are welcoming travelers and visitors. So if you want to be someone who, goes to the coast this weekend, what should you do? How should you go about it?
It's really awkward, right? Because they kind of want like the right amount of people, but how do you know? And so today I asked that question to the group of 4 that you saw at the beginning of the piece, and they all basically had the same answer, which was call businesses that you're familiar with, call restaurants that you're familiar with on the coast, try to call ahead and get their take on whether that's a good day to go. And when you do go, have a backup plan. If the beach is packed, they say consider going hiking, consider getting food and taking it to a park. It's not going to be a wild situation where you can drive a couple of hours and know exactly what you're going to do or have that option available to you every time. Everybody just has to be kind of flexible. And everybody always says that cheesy phrase, pack your patience. But in this case, it's really true. So they're asking that of everybody right now.
Got it. Maggie Vespa, thank you. Now, there's progress being made inland, too. It's just kind of uneven. And that's what we're going to be talking about in our big story tonight, this staggered reopening of the Portland metro area. Now, let's start where we have seen the most progress. Over the weekend, Clackamas County was able to enter phase 1 of Oregon's reopening plan. So I guess if you feel like grabbing Memorial Day dinner or a beer at the bar, you might be able to find an open place there. But today in Lake Oswego, a lot of bars and restaurants are still remaining closed. What wasn't closed? Salons and barbershops. Pat Doris talked to one owner who's already booked up for 3 weeks. It's just kind of a different game for the food industry.
But the problem is, if the restaurants have to, for example, have everybody 6 feet, or each table has to be 6 feet apart, that limits the number of people they can have, and so for a couple of months they're going to have, I would suspect, they're going to have limited revenue.
It's all part of the goal to open responsibly, not just to flip the switch back to open and risk a potential second wave of COVID-19. That said, Washington County isn't open yet, but hopes to soon. See, leaders there say they have applied to enter phase 1 by June 1st. They still need to meet some of the minimum criteria that's needed, but they expect to be able to do so by that date by hiring more contact tracers. And that just leaves Multnomah County, all right? The brunt of urban Portland. We always kind of knew that this county would be the toughest area to reopen because of our density. But unlike Washington County, leaders in Multnomah County won't even give us an idea of when they plan to apply to reopen, yet alone reopen. It could be 1 week, It could be 1 month, we just don't know. What they did tell us is how they're doing to meet the criteria. And here's what Multnomah County still needs to work on as of last week. It still needs more PPE. It still needs to better reduce the impact of the virus on communities of color. It still needs to prove they can handle 3 hypothetical outbreaks. And like Washington County, still needs more contact tracers, specifically 15 contact tracers for every 100,000 people. Google tells me we have a bit over 800,000 people living in Multnomah County, meaning, do the math, we need 120 tracers minimum. And as of last week, the county said it had employed 34. So we got some ground to gain and some work to do. And not just anybody can be one of these contact tracers. Part of the requirements are the tracers are reflective of the county and the people who live in the county. So they need to be able to speak a lot of different languages. And tracers need to be able to trace 95% of all new cases within a 24-hour period. As soon as Multnomah County does all of that, or at least identifies a date where it thinks all of that can be accomplished by, then we will know when we can enter phase 1. Until then, I guess you need to keep those dinner reservations in Lake O.
What we are experiencing has never happened before, so there is no perfect playbook. So we're not going to armchair quarterback the U.S. response to coronavirus. Instead, we're just going to lay out the facts of the first 48 days of testing here in America, when the story continues.
Aim, fire!
We are together today to honor and memorialize our friends, neighbors, relatives, and especially those who gave their lives in the line of duty.
We're here not just to hear the band and a speech or two. We're here to be reminded of the difficulties and the sacrifices.
Because of the sacrifices of so many Americans, we have lived and worked in freedom.
We are a great nation because of our veterans, men and women who are buried in our national cemeteries. Some lived and some died to keep this great nation free so that we may live with the freedom that we have today.
Memorial Day, as we know it now, didn't officially become a federal holiday until 1971, but it has a long history before that. So, how did we get here? Humans have been honoring their fallen soldiers for thousands of years, at least since the ancient Greeks and Romans, who held remembrance days every year. In the United States, different places started holding their own versions of Memorial Day during the Civil War. One of those happened in 1865 in Charleston, South Carolina, when recently freed slaves organized a ceremony to honor fallen Union soldiers. In other cities, women came together to decorate graves. This became even more common after President Lincoln was assassinated. In 1868, the leader of a group of Northern Civil War veterans designated May 30th as Decoration Day. Northern states made this a holiday, but Southern states chose to honor fallen Confederate soldiers on a different day. After World War II, more people started calling the holiday Memorial Day. And in 1968, Congress decided to make it a federal holiday on the last Monday in May to create a 3-day weekend. That took effect in 1971. So what's the real difference between Memorial Day and Veterans Day? Well, simply put, Memorial Day honors soldiers who have died in battle, while Veterans Day honors those who are still living. Veterans Day on November 11th coincides with the end of World War I. On that date, the UK and other Commonwealth countries hold Remembrance Day, which is more like Memorial Day here in the US. And that's how we got here.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the story here on this Memorial Day. Hopefully you're able to talk with us online. Get on Twitter and use that hashtag HeyDan, or email us, that works just as good. Hit us up at thestory@kgw.com. Now, as much as we love to, pat ourselves on the back for trying to do things a little bit differently around here at The Story, we really, haven't changed all that much. The Story is still part of KGW, which has partnerships with other great stations all across the country. One of them is KUSA in Denver, and their reporter, Chris Vanderveen, spent a lot of time looking back at the first 48 days of this coronavirus pandemic, specifically why it took the United States so long to begin testing people. Now, like most stories about numbers, they don't mean much without context. So here's Chris Vanderveen from Denver with some context about testing.
Without context, numbers appear chaotic, as erratic as a gust of wind. Without context,
high alert for a pneumonia outbreak in the city of Wuhan.
Numbers like 48 and 60 mean little, but give it a moment, because soon enough they will.
Coronavirus.
10 days after the Centers for Disease Control warned U.S. doctors of an outbreak of pneumonia in Wuhan, China, the CDC tested its first patient.
Global concern about
this new coronavirus strain
is to detect this virus early.
It found its first case 3 days later.
A man in Washington State.
In his 30s. When a test found it in Washington State.
First confirmed U.S. case of the contagious coronavirus.
Following day, the president,
we have it totally under control,
appeared unfazed.
It's going to be just fine.
And day after day after day, all was fine, until one day, someone suggested maybe it wasn't.
We don't know the accuracy of this test.
Not that it stopped an anxious CDC from sending those tests to various state labs, but there was clearly a problem. Supplied with the new kits, states managed to test no more than 1, 0, 3, or 2 samples per day. Finally, by mid-February, the CDC admitted
they were getting indeterminate answers.
Admitted the tests it had sent states had not worked well.
So we're taking a little extra time here.
Flawed results stalled testing nationwide. 69 samples tested, 63 samples tested. By the time the CDC remedied the problem with the tests, the president suggested the low case counts were a good sign.
So far, we have lost nobody to coronavirus in the United States.
The next day, nobody turned into one.
Tragic news. Now the first U.S. death.
It was a male in his 50s.
This is still rapidly unfolding.
Then one turned into 6, which turned into 14.
Anybody that wants a test can get a test.
Context. In a country of more than 327 million, that day, the 48th day of testing, little more than 2,900 had received a test. Little more than 2,900, less than 1/100th of 1% of the country. Context. In 48 days, the U.S. had managed to test, on average, roughly 5 dozen people per day. As patients sought limited testing, cases doubled every 2 days. 400, 1,300.
Now have the capacity to test up to 75,000 people for COVID-19.
That day, the U.S. had tested roughly 6% of that number, roughly 5,000 in all tested. Deaths remained rare, 43, 51. Yet that day,
that is a failing.
And a failing, yes.
It is a failing. I mean, let's admit it. Dr. Anthony Fauci finally said what anybody who wanted a test already knew. The idea of anybody getting it easily, the way people in other countries are doing it, we're not set up for that. Do I think we should be? Yes, but we're not. The following day, 1,300 positive cases and at least 55 deaths.
We therefore expect up to 500,000 additional tests will be available early next week.
It would take another 13 days for the country to test 500,000. 13 days of more cases and a rapid increase in deaths. 100, 200, 400, 700, 1,200. By the time the country tested 500,000, the country had confirmed more than 86,000 positive cases.
We're just learning about this for the first time.
A statewide order for people to stay at home.
And by the time the country tested 1 million, more than 3,800 were dead.
The death toll is rising.
We are in the surge, yes.
Context. During the first 48 days of testing, the country managed to test roughly 6 patients a day. More than a month later, we are still trying to understand the ramifications of that, at a time when even now, anyone who wants a test still can't get a test.
Thank you to our Chris Vanderveen and our partners at KUSA in Denver for putting that together for us. Hopefully it was informative to you. The slow roll of testing is a big deal because early on states had a pretty tough time identifying clusters of outbreaks like the ones that we saw in nursing homes. Plus, in many places across America, coronavirus was likely circulating, they think, in February before we were doing any testing at all.
Hey everybody, I'm Matt Tofino. The weather story today is really a space story and really a SpaceX story because 2 days from now, T-minus 48 hours, actually less than that, SpaceX is going to launch American astronauts into space from American soil in an American spacecraft. And if you think, so what, we've done that before? Well, yeah, we have, but not for 11 years. So the astronauts arrived at Cape Canaveral, as you can see, to some fanfare. Obviously, for a very, very good reason. That would be Commander Doug Hurley, the pilot, and Commander Bob Behnken, who will be flying on a SpaceX rocket. Now, this is impressive because it's the first time, first of all, we have not sent American astronauts into space from Cape Kennedy Space Center or any other place in America since 2011. That was on July 8th when the last space shuttle flew, and Doug Hurley was the pilot on that one as well. You can see the commander and the pilot here. So this is a big deal, and it's also a big deal because it's the first time a private company, SpaceX in this case, will be launching astronauts into space to the shuttle. We have never done that before. In fact, there's only 3 countries who have ever put humans into space. Russia, the first, then the US, then China, and now SpaceX, not a country, but a company, obviously. So it is a really big deal that the private and commercial enterprise of putting humans in space will launch at 1:33 Portland time in the afternoon on Wednesday. So it really is going to be a momentous occasion. Now, people in Florida, the officials there are urging people not to crowd the beaches, although the beaches are open, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to watch this. And if you ever get a chance to see a launch live, either from Vandenberg in California or from Kennedy Space Center in Florida or anywhere else, do it. It's a bucket launch thing. I was at Cape Canaveral 4 years ago for the launch of the new weather satellite, and it is a very, very impressive and powerful experience to have. So it's really going to be a momentous occasion. The astronauts will be up there for anywhere from 1 to 4 months, depending on the success of the mission. And another first, or at least the first in 50 years, when they come back to Earth, after being 250 miles up in space, it will be an Atlantic Ocean splashdown. That hasn't happened in 50 years either. So there's a lot going on with this. It's really interesting. Now, what about the risk? This is only the second time that the Dragon Crew spacecraft that SpaceX has produced there, the Crew Dragon spacecraft, it's only the second time it's carried people into space, which is more risky than, say, the 15th time it's done it. But I'm hopeful, and I'm sure they'll have a successful mission, and all eyes will be on Cape Canaveral come Wednesday. Dan, back to you.
It's just fascinating to me that, you know, the 3 countries that you mentioned all did that space race independently from one another, and then for the past few decades they've been working together, all the countries, to operate up in space, and now you have a private company sending people into space.
It is a big deal, and it's also a big deal too because it'll capture the American attention better than all the previous launches for the last 11 years, which have been happening in Kazakhstan. So far away and out of sight. This one right in our own backyard.
Got it. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. So if everyone at home, if you're thinking of people on this Memorial Day, you have some letters you want to send in to us, some messages, please send them in. We're going to read a few of them after the break. Pick up your phone, tweet us using the hashtag #HeyDan. We'd love to talk a little bit about them when we finish the story next.
Freedom is not free. It is protected. It is sustained only at immense cost. And we're here today to pay tribute to those who have paid that cost on our behalf.
You lost a son, a husband, a friend, perhaps a father.
James H. Barker.
Robert W. Clark.
Both of our husbands are up here. Our mom and dad, aunts and uncles.
My father was a Korean vet.
I lost my father in the Second World War.
Albert E. Richmond.
All right, let's read some comments. Tracy wrote in and said, "Hey, Dan, as a former Marine, I would like to thank you for explaining the difference between Memorial Day and Veterans Day for the youth of this great country." I'm glad that you appreciate that. And I think some older people might be curious sometimes, too. You know, that gets lost in the weeds every once in a while. This one came in from Sam. "Hey, Dan, my dad, Sam Haley, was on the second wave of Omaha Beach on D-Day as a combat engineer. Second lieutenant in the Army, he lived to almost 90. I was born 9 months after he came home." Nice detail there. And then this one came from Mark. "I'm honoring my dad who served in World War II in the U.S. Navy. He passed away in 2018. I'm also honoring my nephew who was killed in action in Iraq in 2006. On a day like today, I'm thinking of all of our veterans, especially those who made that ultimate sacrifice, and their families, the people remembering their legacy still with us today. Enjoy your Memorial Day. Remember what it's about. I'll see you back here on The Story tomorrow."